Hi, I'm Daria Teller, and this is another edition of The Higher Authority. My co-host, Doug Walt, Aaron Frenchman here with me today, and today we have a special guest with us. From Executive Alliance, which is a large recruiting firm located in Comac, Long Island, an international recruiting firm, we have David Rivard. David, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, you got it. So David is the Director of Recruiting at Executive Alliance, specializing in accounting and finance. That's going to be our topic today. Doug, take us through it.
Yeah, thank you, David. Certainly accounting and finance in the beginning of a tax year, beginning of a calendar year, there's a lot of different changes that are taking shape in terms of what talent needs are for different the companies or agencies that are handling public accounting, between the interjection of AI, between different compliance and tax changes and such. So there's going to be different business needs, and there's going to be also some staffing needs. So we wanted to bring David in to get his insights around things that he might be seeing in the market for for either full-time talent or fractional talent to be able to support those needs of the business. So what do you see?
Appreciate it.
So what do you see, David, in terms of the world of accounting positions and recruiting for your clients?
Yeah, so I wanted to take some time to talk about consulting opportunities, and from a candidate perspective, and then in the next podcast we'll talk about it a little bit more from a client perspective, why it makes sense, why it may not make sense for you as a candidate or as a client. I think that is relevant to your question, because a lot of times, during these peak periods of need from a client perspective, a company perspective, they just don't have enough people that are permanent employees that can handle the workload that's necessary for that peak period. Sure. So they reach out to consultants, they reach out to people like us to help them find consultants who we have in our database and who we just talk to every day. And it just makes sense for a lot of companies to do that rather than just hire up for the peak periods and then have to let people go during the non-peak periods. That's just not a smart thing to do for anybody. So I want to talk a little bit about that and the pros and cons of sort of consulting for candidates today. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about AI, just because it's so relevant in everything we're hearing and talking about these days. And just sort of an easy, simple example of how AI is sort of impacting a small sliver, but nonetheless a material sliver of the population of accountants and auditors. So we all know that there's these big four firms out there, the behemoths of the industry that provide audit, tax services, and consulting services. But there's also these mid-tier firms, the BDOs, the Mazars of the world that also hire a ton of auditors and tax folks. So I'm talking to these auditors, mainly because I'm filling a cheap plug. I'm working on a director of internal audit opportunities.
It's good to plug. Good to plug.
One of my clients, so I'm talking to auditors. So I'm talking to auditors, and I'm picking their brain a little bit. And I'm saying, hey, give me a simple example about like how AI is impacting your day-to-day audit. And I'm hearing sort of a consistent theme of, okay, this is very easy. We have, an easy example, and everyone can sort of probably relate to it. We have a transaction database or a data set of transactions. Okay. So that transactions could be anything, right? It could be sales, payroll, right? Anything that's, a large data set that's important to the financial statements, that impacts the financial statements. So back in the day when I was an auditor, we would take that data set and we would do a representative sample, a statistical sample of those transactions. And, depending on how many transactions there are, dictated how many we had to sample and test as part of that representative sample for that transaction data set. So that would take a lot of time. I mean, just, if it was 1 million transactions, let's say we'd have to test 1,000.
It's a lot of work.
Transactions to test, and then extrapolate and do an error rate based on what we found in those 1,000. And that was all fine. And, the accounting folks, AICPA, General Accepted Accounting Standards, auditing standards said that we could do that, and that was acceptable. And it is acceptable still. But now they're taking that data set, those 1 million transactions, and they're putting it in an AI program.
For all 1 million, probably.
That's looking at all 1 million transactions. So they're looking at all 1 million transactions, the AI is looking at all 1 million transactions and saying, hey, here are the 100 that you should probably look at because they look like there's an anomaly. It looks like there's something that's not consistent with past trends. It's not consistent with what should be in that account based on dollar amount or vendor name or whatever it is, customer name. And then the auditor can then look at those 100, and it's a much more scaled down and finite list of transactions that have an impact or potentially have an impact on the financial statements. So normally, when I was, back when I was an auditor, a second or third year auditor would be the person who would tackle that statistical sampling and testing those 1,000 transactions, and it would take days, literally days. So I asked somebody the other day how long it takes to go through these data sets, and he said, like, Dave, he's like, minutes. Like, he's like,
it's just fast.
It's
sure.
like 25,000 transactions a minute it can go through.
How accurate is it?
Well,
that's the thing.
I asked him that. You're right. And I said, how accurate is it? And he said, well, what they do to validate the accuracy is they run it through multiple AI programs.
Okay.
And then compare the results.
Okay.
So if you run it through 2 or 3 different AI programs and you get the same results,
it's probably accurate. Right. Okay.
But to your point, you then go through those 100 that it tells you to look at, and you see that there is either something that's wrong or something that's not wrong.
Sure.
Here's the reason why it looks wrong, but it's not. Right. So that's just one example. I mean, just So
how do you think that affects accounting and finance? The whole, how does it affect the job market then?
Yeah.
What's going to happen?
There's definitely a crunch, and in terms of available personnel to fill these positions and these needs at these CPA firms.
Sure. There's
not enough people. There just isn't. There's been a problem for years of people entering the workforce, entering the accounting workforce, entering the programs to become accountants, CPAs, all that. Lots of good reasons. Maybe that's a good topic for another day for another podcast. Why that happened, but there's just a significant decrease in the amount of people becoming accountants, combined with the fact that the people that started being accountants in the 70s and 80s are all retiring, like in droves.
Yeah, sure.
So it's like that confluence of factors that are really putting a crunch on the accounting industry, but more specifically the CPA firms, because they tend to pay a little bit less than private industry, and it's sort of a breeding ground, a training ground, right? Where you learn. So they're faced with these shortages, and here comes something like AI that can take that simple example I just gave you, an $80,000 second or third year auditor, and that I just took a week's work away from that auditor by just using AI for 10 minutes. Yeah. So that's just one example, right? So yes, I think AI is going to probably replace some of these lower level kind of positions. Unfortunately, you're still going to need people to actually validate that what AI is giving you is accurate, and you're still going to need that, the esoteric sort of, thing that makes aspects of advising the client in terms of things AI maybe not be able to do yet. I'm not 100% sure about that, but it may be able to give advisory role. The second example I wanted to give you on AI, you have a question?
Yeah, my real question is, do you think that this fear of AI replacing these early roles leads to less and less people majoring in accounting in college,
I do.
Following that? So it's AI not only is taking the jobs, but it's taking the pool away.
I do.
So
I do. Yeah, I mean, if I had a son or daughter that was thinking about becoming an accountant, I would dive pretty deep and see what that what that future looks like. Yeah. I mean, you got to assume it's going to have an impact. Yeah. In terms of hiring.
My other question is that, you're running everything through AI programs, and like in any business, you talk to any legal people, that the criminals are always one step ahead of everyone else. Are we going to see an uptick in creative accounting that can beat AI programs?
Oh gosh.
Or people creating those programs to extract
Right.
the information.
And then does that lead to other jobs like more forensic side of the accounting industry?
Yeah.
Could be. I'm not sure. Could be. Yeah, it could be. I mean, you got to vet the programs you're using, obviously, when you're using an AI program to help with your audit. A lot of these CPA firms are building their own, programs themselves, AI programs themselves, so they know what the inputs are and they know it's built correctly.
Sure.
The larger firms are doing that. But yeah, it's a valid point. There's always going to be somebody that's looking to,
Game the system.
game the system, yeah. The second example I wanted to give you, and another simple example, is something called a gap checklist. So a gap checklist is, the bane of every auditor's existence, right? It's like, back in the day, my day, it was, about 400 pages. And literally what that is at the end of the audit, towards the end of an audit, you would look at this gap checklist, and it was literally every gap pronouncement and disclosure that you would need to potentially make in the financial statements of your client. And you had to go through every one on every page and see if it was applicable to your client, yes or no, is it material, yes or no, and then kind of go from there. So the gentleman I was talking to said that he's now able to put the financial statements of the client in AI, and what AI does is it compares that client's financial statements to, I'm not going to say maybe not all, but several hundred, maybe thousands of other companies that are in the similar industry, that have similar accounting issues as this financial statement is depicting. And then it basically completes the gap checklist for you and tells you exactly which of those 400 pages, the items on those 400 pages need to be looked at because it could have a potential disclosure. You need to potentially disclose this item in your client's financial statements, rather than, that could take days to go through the gap checklist. It just does it in 10 minutes. So you can call me directly on my office line is 631-498-5774. Email address is davidr@execsallied.com.
Thank you again for being with us. Thank you,
you so
Doug,
much.
Aaron, another great episode. So if you are looking to contact us, you have questions for us or for David, feel free to contact us at info@execsallied.com. This is The Higher Authority. See you next time.